Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and after a long 2024 season, we're finally on to the 2025 offseason to bring you all kinds of dynasty and offseason related content. And what better way to kick that off than with some dynasty IDP rankings? I've put together my top 250, which you can check out for free on pff.com right now. But today I'm going to go into some detail on just my top 35, provide some rationale, some data, some logic, some spice to kick off the IDP offseason with a bang. So let's get it. All right, ladies and gents, it's been a minute. I mean, hell, week 17 feels like forever ago since we got some IDP podcast content in the feed here. But the break is over because we are so back. We've never been more back, baby. I'll be pumping out an IDP episode at least every other week, all off season long, bringing in some guests from around the IDP world, talking dynasty topics, rookies, and eventually getting into the 2025 season prep. And that starts today with my first run of dynasty rankings prior to free agency. These will be updated post free agency. I'll update them again post NFL draft and then right before the season as well. But for now, this is version 1 of the 2025 dynasty rankings. So we're going to get into it, but I do want to start with a quick little breakdown of the things that matter to me when I'm putting these rankings together, just to provide some rationale before we get into it, just to answer some questions and clear some things up. But the first thing is almost always going to be scoring. So the main thing that I'm looking to do with my scoring settings is to create more balance across the positions. That isn't always easy depending on the fantasy platform that you're using, but it's not impossible either, right? So play around with the settings, get a sense of where each IDP finishes on the year. And then, our PFF preferred scoring settings are on the screen right now. So if you're using MFL or something like that, these are perfect for that. It's a pretty good mix of IDPs at the top. So it's not just dominated by linebackers, for example. Like if you want the tackle heavy approach, go for it. Just expect almost all the value to come from the linebacker position. But with these settings, last year's top 25 IDP scorers, that gives us like 9 edges, 5 linebackers, 3 defensive tackles, 8 safeties. And that exact breakdown won't be consistent year to year. Some years there will be more linebackers than safeties. Other years we might not see as many defensive tackles and the edges might dominate. But the point is there's at least some parity between the positions, and we're ultimately able to provide more value to the positions that the NFL values more, and then we can draft talent more highly instead of just guys who are going to be on the field a lot, which is more fun in my opinion. But again, draft as you like, whatever floats your boat, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing to note with these rankings is that I'll be using like a true position designation, meaning that our stand-up edge rushers are not classified as linebackers, but they're classified as edges along with the defensive ends. Linebackers are just off-ball linebackers. It's nice to see more kind of platforms embracing those designations, MFL specifically, making that the default setting. And then lastly, I'll reference expected sacks quite a bit, especially in relation to our pass rushers. And the reason for that is because I've been compiling a lot of data over the years, and the one metric that I was able to create and utilize, expected sacks, has also proven to be the most stable year to year and the most predictive of future sacks as well. So it is the best metric we have for pass rushers. That's not just my opinion, but based on the data as well. So if you want to learn more about that, then I'll link the most recent article about that in the episode description for you to check out and to learn more. Okay, I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get into the IDPs now. Again, this is my top 35. The full top 250 can be found for free on pff.com. And for this show, I'm going to be trying something a little bit different as well. Instead of starting at number 1 at the top, I'm going to kind of count down from number 35 all the way to number 1 and include all the positions within that range just to switch it up a little bit. So without further ado, Let's start with number 35 in the ranks. And the reason that I wanted to start with 35 specifically was because I wanted to include a couple safeties on this list. So it wasn't just defensive linemen and linebackers. So we'll start off with my safety two for Dynasty right now, Kyle the Hammer Hamilton of the Baltimore Ravens. Number 35, end of the third-ish round is kind of like, if you're looking at it from an IDP only perspective, this is really the absolute earliest that we should be looking at this position. And there will be some that go for it earlier, but if I'm being honest, it's still rich for my blood. But I think anyone who wants an elite and consistent starter who will likely remain in that spot for years to come, this is where you're going to have to pull the trigger. Hamilton, along with the next safety that I'll talk about, are kind of our best dynasty bets, in my opinion. He's just 23 years old. He's established himself as one of the best players at his position in the entire league and for IDP as well. So 2 years now as a full-time starter, 2 years among the top 12 at his position in points per game, which at such a volatile position with a lot of turnover among the top scorers, it's very promising that Hamilton has not only been an effective IDP, but there should be no concerns about him not being like an every down player for a long time in this league, as he's also very good in NFL terms as well. The other safety that I consider to be in that conversation with Hamilton, and my safety one overall coming in at number 34 in the Dynasty rankings, is Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions. And really, we're looking at the same kind of profile as Hamilton as far as young safeties who have proven to be a top player at their position in the NFL, but also one who has delivered for IDP. And Branch, through his first 2 years in the league, even without being a full-time player in year one, has definitely delivered. Top three at his position in overall scoring and points per game. He delivered a 96th percentile mark in tackles versus expected because he only spent a quarter of his snaps in the box in 2024 and was mostly utilized deep and in the slot. So still being able to rack up tackles at the rate that he did was very encouraging. It could also be a red flag in a way as well, though, right? Especially if he stays in that deep role. And even if you look at the percentage of his like fantasy production that came from non-tackles in 2024, so about 26%, that was an 83 percentile mark. So there's some concerns there, I think, for regression maybe in 2025. But for Dynasty, I'm still not sure there is any other safety I'd rather have right now, outside of maybe Hamilton, who's pushing for that. But right now, I'd give the edge to Brian Branch. Okay, our first linebacker of the day comes in next as LB11 for me in the rankings. It's Chicago Bears, TJ Edwards. Now, maybe this one is a surprise to people. I'm not really sure the temperature from the general public on TJE at this point in the offseason, because I know he's coming off a down year and probably doesn't seem like a top 10 dynasty asset for the position, even though he's right on the fringe of that for me at 11, especially since he has no draft capital to his name either as a former undrafted free agent. So that being said, as down as a year of 2024 was for Edwards, I don't think it's a killer for him. He's still finished as LB 14 on the season. He's the type of player for me that has earned some leeway on an off year where he finished 10th percentile in tackles versus expected. It's the first time since I've been tracking that data that he's finished lower than the 88th percentile. So a huge drop off for him, but one that I'm treating more as an outlier right now and not necessarily the new norm. So we've got Dennis Allen. He's coming in as the new defensive coordinator. So this defense is going to change a bit. And the hope will be that for someone like Edwards, who has been an elite tackler in the past, it could be a change for the better. But for now, he'll be just outside the top 10 linebackers for me in Dynasty. Okay, the very next linebacker I have up on the list at LB10 is Terrell Bernard of the Buffalo Bills. And I really wanted to put Bernard higher on this list because of that amazing 2023 season that he had, where it was good grades and great production, but I just couldn't put him any higher than 10 after what we got in 2024, which, look, that 2023 season, it can't be ignored. And really, it's one of the things that kind of keeps him in this top 10, along with taking over that LB1 role in the defense from Matt Milano, playing ahead of him in the latter half of the year, including the playoffs. But he really kind of struggled in terms of PFF grades, where, if you look at the grades, they're if they were average grades, I can't weigh them in too much. But when they're as poor as what Bernard had in 2024, it's kind of hard to ignore him, ignore the grades as well. 47.6 PFF grade, ranked 117th among 130 regular season linebackers. Then a 36.8 coverage grade, ranked 121st among the same cohort. So very bad stuff from Bernard this year, and concerning enough where I think this is about as high as I could get him, because he is productive. LB 24 in points per game, 80th percentile in tackles versus expected. He's just 25 years old and a former day 2 pick. I just have some hesitation about fully embracing him, but have faith that he can deliver in 2025 across an entire healthy season and prove this was more of an outlier year. But how much he'll bounce back is kind of the bigger question. So we'll see there. Dexter Lawrence is the first interior defensive lineman that we'll talk about today. And I say interior defensive lineman because this isn't your ordinary defensive tackle. He is a nose tackle, making his standing in IDP even more impressive since it's so rare to get this level of dominance and pass rush production from that position. So Lawrence is coming in as DT3 for me. Now, Lawrence suffered a dislocated elbow that ended his season this year, but prior to that, he was dominating again. He didn't get to that elite 90 plus pass rush grade that he had the previous 2 years, but the numbers were still great, and he was delivering for IDP, ranking as DT6 in points per game. He did that with 9 sacks in 2024. He ranked 86th percentile in expected sacks. As I've talked about before, expected sacks are the most predictive metric for future sacks and the most stable metric we have for defensive linemen. And he ranked that high despite not playing since week 13. So as far as expected sacks per game, Lawrence ranked higher than any other player at his position. So that talent and playing time continue to be his greatest asset, and someone that we should still rank highly in IDP for Dynasty or otherwise, and even more so in DT required formats. All right, another defensive tackle for me in the ranks, and one that I feel like is going to be a divisive pick, at least from where he's ranked at his position, because we got a couple lower IDP output seasons in a row from Quinnen Williams. But 2023, Quinnen Williams actually played better than he ever had in his career. He just didn't get the sack luck. Then this past year in 2024, it was a down year for him and for seemingly the entire Jets roster. So not surprising to see Quinnen brought down a bit with them, right? That being said, Quinnen still finished 97th percentile at his position in expected sacks because of an ideal combination of strong pass rush metrics and playing time. So even a down year for Quinnen still kept him among the elite in our most important metric for defensive linemen, which gives me at least a lot of confidence in treating him as a top 2 option for his position. Whether you guys agree or not, that's up to you, of course, but still just 27 years old. He was adding 0.4 expected sacks per game. So nearly a half sack expected per game. That was 99th percentile for his position. He also averages nearly 70% of defensive snaps every week, which is above average for the position. So if Quinnen continues to do what he does, specifically if he gets back to the level that he was playing at in 2023, as far as his grades and his pass rush metrics, we could see a hugely productive season, which would be huge for his value because he isn't one of these older defensive tackles in the league right now. But either way, we still have to see it and hope for that bounce back in production. So for now, he's IDP 30 in the dynasty ranks. All right, let's take a look at our next, our first edge defender next, edge 19 for me to be exact. And I think this is about the range where I had Kayvon Thibodeau last year. So he's staying as that kind of mid-range edge 2 for me in Dynasty. And I think this coming season is going to be key for him to either move way up the list or get taken down and get taken over by a lot of the young up-and-comers to move him maybe way down the list, right? And that's because it's been a bit of a mixed bag for what we've got from Thibodeau so far in his NFL career. He's been an overachiever, he's been an underachiever, he's been hurt, and he's delivered some good PFF grades. He's been healthy and delivered shit PFF grades. So coming out of 2024, what's kind of kept him in this same range as last year for me, at least, is that, yeah, it was a disappointing season for IDP, partly because he was hurt, but the regression year was definitely expected after 2023. We talked about that last offseason. The thing that I found encouraging was that when he was out there, he actually proved to be a better pass rusher than we've seen in the previous 2 seasons, setting a new career high in pass rush grade with a 72.0 and a new career high in expected sacks, finishing 75th percentile in that regard, despite missing 5 games due to injury. Now, part of that strong grade and expected sacks rank came from the final 2 games of the year where he was on fire. He delivered 10 pressures and 3 sacks, and he did it against 2 of the best offensive lines in the league in Indianapolis and Philadelphia. So not the biggest sample of high-end play in 2024, but still better than anything else we saw from him in previous years. So I'm kind of giving him another year in this range because he's still just 24 years old, a former top 5 pick, all that. There's potential here, but we haven't seen it consistently just yet. So hoping that 2025 is kind of that year for him. Okay, how about a young edge who did deliver on high-end potential in 2024 and put together a very impressive season? Finishing as edge 14 on the year was Nick Bonito of the Denver Broncos, thanks to 13 sacks, 2 defensive touchdowns, and a solid snap share as a full-time starter. Now, there's definitely concern, I guess, for regression with Bonito because one, the defensive touchdowns are incredibly unstable, and we shouldn't be banking on that again. And 2, he delivered 6 sacks over expected, which is the highest mark for the position. And when that happens, we also kind of brace for regression the next year. Now, Bonito, he's a good young player, 82nd percentile in expected sacks, top 30 overall in pass rush grades for the position. He's gonna play a lot, and he's just 25 years old. All of those things kind of keep him in that mid-edge 2 range for Dynasty. But if you can cash out for anyone else in this range, either someone ranked ahead of him or someone ranked behind him with an additional piece added on, I'd look to do that because I don't think 2025 will be nearly as productive, even if I do think his long-term outlook is still decently high. Okay, how about a new name that emerged as a top linebacker in 2024? Daiyan Henley of the Los Angeles Chargers comes in as LB9 for me. Now, I was guilty of writing Henley off for dead last offseason with a new coaching staff coming in and that coaching staff drafting their Michigan boy, Junior Colson. But I was dead wrong. And Henley did everything in his power to lock down that LB1 spot for the Los Angeles Chargers for the foreseeable future. Whether Colson emerges as a starter or not, we'll have to see. But Henley specifically, 90th percentile in tackles versus expected, 70.5 PFF grade, including the 17th best coverage grade at the position, a 72.9, which was his calling card coming out of college, was his talent as a coverage defender. Now, he finished the year as LB15 in IDP, but the most important thing for me, at least, was that Henley looked like he belonged as an NFL starter. He found ways to be productive even when he wasn't a 100% snap player. Outside of week 17, of course, we can't hold that against him, as insane as that goose egg was. But on the year as a whole, this is a young linebacker who seemed to have kind of earned his spot as a top option in Dynasty and made his way into the top 10 at the position for me right now. Okay, LB8 and IDP 26 for the Dynasty rankings. Foye Oluokun of the Jacksonville Jaguars coming off a down year. There's no doubt about that. Part of that had to do with missed time with an injury, but an even bigger part of that was how he was utilized in Jacksonville's defense, which crushed his production. Like, it started with him not being an every down player in the defense, rotating off on some drives, way more than he ever did as a starter. Then he got hurt, missed time, and when he came back, there was still some rotating him like on and off, though not as much. But what hurt him was that when he was out there, he was lining up right on the defensive line, which is something we talked about in season, but it's a killer for tackle efficiency, whether he's rushing the passer or not. So this was also defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen, who also made the Jags a more man-heavy defense than they were the year before. Also, a tackle efficiency killer for linebackers. But Nielsen is gone now, thankfully. So Anthony Campanelli comes over from Green Bay, previously serving as their linebackers coach. So we don't know exactly the type of scheme that we'll see now in Jacksonville, but at the very least, Foye's usage shouldn't be nearly as detrimental to his IDP production as what we saw last last year. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him bounce back in 2025. Maybe not to that, back to back to back LB1 again, but at least back to his elite tackling ways like we've seen from him before. So I'm feeling optimistic about Foye right now, and that's why he kind of stays in the top 10 linebackers for me. Okay, coming in at LB7 for my dynasty rankings, probably the most intriguing linebacker of the 2024 season, and now one of the most intriguing linebackers of the 2025 offseason, as he's a pending free agent, Zach Bond of the Philadelphia Eagles, who finished as the overall LB1 in IDP, LB1 in points per game. He was also the highest graded linebacker here at PFF, both overall and in coverage. And he also led the position with 30.6 tackles over expected. So everything about Bond's 2024 season would say that he's elite. The main question will be what happens in free agency first. Will he re-sign with the Eagles or will he go elsewhere? Will the open market value him as the player that he was in 2024 or not? Is he more than just a one-year wonder? It's hard to say right now, but I'm treating him as a top 10 dynasty IDP linebacker, even at 28 years old, which isn't old, by the way, but having those elite grades to his name are key, and it will be leverage for him to prove how good he was in 2024. It helps that they won the Super Bowl as well. He's got that to his name and get himself a nice contract. But until I see the landing spot, I'm kind of leaving him here as LB8, but I think re-signing with the Eagles or getting a nice long-term contract somewhere else will probably move him up the ranks a little bit for me. So excited to see how that kind of shakes out. All right, from a linebacker, we're going to go to an edge defender now. An established veteran on the defensive line, Danielle Hunter of the Houston Texans, is edge 17 and number 24 in the dynasty rankings for me. Now, Hunter is 30 years old, but for me, there's no real signs of kind of slowing down because the guy is still one of the best players at his position. 82.7 PFF grade, 80.7 pass rush grade, 97th percentile in expected sacks, and finished as the overall edge 10 in IDP, thanks to 11.5 sacks. Double-digit sacks really have been common for Hunter for his career, and this year was no different. He plays a workhorse role that I don't expect to change much coming into this coming season, and I don't think that should be overlooked because he's 30 years old. So there needs to kind of be a balance between youth and production in our dynasty builds if we're going to be competitive. And a player like Hunter is just the type that we should be looking at to fill that production role while we let some of the younger talent ripen a bit on our dynasty rosters. And then very similar to Hunter, Trey Hendrickson of the Cincinnati Bengals, that mindset of targeting consistent and productive IDP assets in dynasty. He's my edge 16, Trey Hendrickson, and begins and comes into our top 24 dynasty assets at number 23. So Hendrickson, like Hunter, also 30 years old, but he's established himself as a top 5 pass rusher at the position since 2022. And over that span, his 92.1 pass rush grade ranks tied for 4th with Aiden Hutchinson, behind only Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, and Nick Bosa. And he's got the production to prove it as well. Back-to-back seasons with 17.5 sacks for Hendo. Finished as a top 5 IDP edge as well this past year. Really, the only thing that keeps him at 23 here and not inside the top 20 or higher is essentially being 30 years old and really just not being the tackler that others are at the position. So if we get some sack regression, the floor for him is much lower than most, right? Otherwise, he's been so damn good and he's earned a spot to be considered a locked-in starter for us every week until further notice. Okay, quick ad break here from our friends at Fabric by Gerber Life. The new year is a great time to reevaluate financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Now is the perfect time to make sure your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, benefiting your child from tuition and tutors to music classes. And when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, meetfabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, one of the more interesting names on this list, at least as far as I'm concerned, Trayvon Walker of the Jacksonville Jaguars comes in as edge 15, IDP 2020, IDP 22 overall for me in the dynasty ranks. And I don't think I'd blame anyone for having him higher or even lower than this, depending on what you value in your IDPs. But for me, as of right now, I think 2025 should be the year where we finally see that high-end potential come together and maybe, just maybe, put him among the elites. But for now, it's still just potential, as he hasn't quite put it together yet at the NFL level. Now, you can look at the production, double-digit sacks in back-to-back years. He finished as edge 12 this past season. But keeping in mind that the reason for that, and maybe a huge reason for that, is that the volume of snaps that he plays every week. He played 911 defensive snaps in 2024. That was fourth most at the position. 555 pass rush snaps, which was second most at the position. That alone is going to allow for excellent production. The problem is that his underlying metrics, while still, the best of his career this past year, tell us that he isn't quite to that like truly elite dynasty prospect level, and not even to the level of it like his teammate, Josh Hines-Allen, if you're comparing the two, right? So you look at Trayvon Walker, 68.2 PFF grade, that ranked tied for 52nd at the position. 65.1 pass rush grade, ranked 68th. 12.1% win rate, that ranked 49th. 11% pressure rate, that ranked tied for 61st. So it's not all there yet for Walker, but I think year 4 here is pretty close to where we should expect to see those metrics match the production and kind of create more confidence that Walker can replicate that production every year going forward, even if he isn't playing 900 plus snaps every season, right? His athleticism, it's only going to get him so far in the NFL as far as being a consistent threat. And we knew he'd be a project coming into the league out of college, but now is where the point where he needs to stop being a project and start showing why he was drafted over Aiden Hutchinson, which I don't think he'll ever get to that level, but he needs to at least get on Josh Hines-Allen's level, right? So who is a kind of consistent play-to-play threat and dominant at the position, even if the sack numbers aren't always there. So that's the main thing we're going to be looking for Walker to move up the rankings next offseason. Okay, from one Walker to another. My LB6 is Green Bay Packers linebacker Quay Walker, who didn't have like the elite season that like a Zach Bond had, who is one linebacker spot behind him. But I mean, nobody did, if we're being honest. So the one thing that Quay Walker does have right now is that stability. He's a first round talent who has been a full-time player for 2 seasons now in Green Bay. And it's still early enough in his career that we should probably expect him to remain in that similar role with the potential to even improve his production, right? Like he's had at least 100 total tackles in each of his first 3 NFL seasons, but hasn't quite reached the heights of those that finish like top 12 at their position. And part of that is that he's missed at least 3 games in each of the past 2 seasons. So I think a full season in 2025 alongside Edgerrin Cooper, like he'll have the best year of his NFL career this coming season and potentially solidify himself in this kind of high ranking range. Okay, top 20 time and kicking things off with another young player that I'm optimistic about going forward. Laiatu Latu of the Indianapolis Colts had a quiet rookie season for most, but keeping in mind that he was kind of eased into a starting role, he averaged just 54% of defensive snaps on the year. That number should only increase in year 2 and beyond. Then looking at some of his underlying metrics, he did as well for a rookie as we should be expecting, outside of like the Myles Garrett and Nick Bosa type prospects of the world. So I just talked about Trayvon Walker, for example, right, and the trajectory that he's heading into year 4. But if you look at Trayvon Walker's rookie season and comparing that to Laiatu Latu's rookie season, Walker's a former first overall pick, but I think Latu is already further ahead than what we saw than Trayvon Walker in year one. We can project Latu to be maybe on a very promising trajectory heading into year two. So if you compare their rookie seasons a little bit, Walker as a rookie played 392 pass rush snaps. Latu played 357. So more playing time for Walker as a pass rusher, significantly more playing time overall, like over 300 defensive snaps more for Walker. However, Latu still delivered more sacks than him in year one. That's just for the production matters crowd. And as far as underlying pass rush metrics go, which we trust more, Latu with a 14% win rate, Walker was at just 10%. 10.6 pressure rate for Latu, Walker was at 9.2%. 72.1 pass rush grade for Latu, just 59.1 for Walker. And when it came to expected sacks, Latu finished 74th percentile for his position as a rookie, where Walker finished just 52nd percentile, even with more playing time. So do not give up on Latu after one season. If you listen to this podcast last offseason, you'll know that his production profile coming out of college was one of the best in recent years, and that's already starting to translate to the NFL and could continue to do so as he develops and gets more playing time. Okay, how about an established edge now for this next spot? Coming in as IDP 19, edge 13 in the Dynasty rankings, Jonathan Grenard, whose production of years past was finally matched by really strong pass rush metrics to provide, I think, some padding to the level of comfort we should feel with Grenard as far as his long-term viability. This man delivered 12 sacks in 2024, marking back-to-back seasons of double-digit sacks for him, but he did so with a 99th percentile mark in expected sacks, thanks to a top 15 pass rush grade and those underlying metrics. So just 27 years old, seemingly locked into a starting role with the Minnesota Vikings for the next few seasons. He finished as edge 4 on the year with a solid tackle rate as well. And then obviously being able to deliver on that elite expected sack mark, which will hopefully continue here for the foreseeable future. Okay, on to the top 12 edges now, and IDP 18 for these dynasty rankings. I have Josh Hines-Allen in this spot. He's been someone that, at least I think, has been kind of underrated for his career outside of 2023, right, where he landed 17 and a half sacks and everyone realized just how good he can be. Obviously didn't reach those heights again in 2024, so folks might be disappointed with the output. But again, he's another guy that performed at a very high level as far as his underlying metrics, which is our best indicator that he can reach those heights again. Top 10 PFF pass rush grade last year, 94th percentile in expected sacks, which we love to see for our pass rushers because, again, it's a strong projection for the year ahead, especially for someone like Hines-Allen, who is now due for positive regression. That he went through the natural sack regression that he was expected coming out of 2023. Now he's on the other end of that, where we can see an increase in sacks going into 2025. Also just 27 years old and established as arguably a top 10 pass rusher at his position now. So there's plenty of value to target there with Josh Hines-Allen for IDP purposes. All right, sticking in that 2019 draft class for this next guy, coming in as edge 11, IDP 17, Brian Burns of the New York Giants is coming off a really good first season with his new team, doing so at just 26 years old and finishing as the overall edge 3 on the year for IDP. So Burns delivered his best pass rush grade, an 82.9, since his second season in the league back in 2020. And he was kind of seemingly plateauing a bit with the Panthers as far as development goes as a pass rusher. Even though he had like a 12 and a half sack season in there in 2021, I think it was, or 2022, he was always kind of hanging out in that middle range of pass rushers as far as like his key underlying metrics go, like low mid 70 something pass rush grade, pressure rate between 11 and 13%, win rate was at least climbing, but he hadn't really broken through that crowd of middle, of the pack edge defenders there either. So things had been kind of stagnant for Burns in Carolina, and it seems like he got a fresh start in New York on this very strong defensive line, which doesn't hurt either, right? So He finished 93rd percentile in expected sacks, which is the same career high percentile mark that he was at when he had that 12 and a half sack season a few years ago. He actually finished 95th percentile in tackles versus expected as well this past season. So if things remain the same here for Burns in New York, we could see an improvement in the sack column as well. Then he might make a push for top 5 on the year again in IDP scoring for his position as he was this past year. So that was definitely promising to see for Brian Burns. All right. Let's talk a couple linebackers now. Coming in at LB5 for me, IDP 16 in the Dynasty ranks, a player who I think blew expectations out the water as a rookie, even considering that he was the first linebacker drafted from the 2024 rookie class. Edgerrin Cooper of the Green Bay Packers flashed all the makings of a high-end IDP producer. And he did that while serving as like the clear LB2 at best in that Packers defense on any given week, averaging just 55% of the team's defensive snaps on the year when he was in the lineup. Even with the lower snap share, which accounted for just 489 total defensive snaps, Cooper still finished 84th percentile in tackles versus expected. And I don't think there's any doubt that we should see a snap increase for Cooper in year 2. Whether that's a true full-time role or not remains to be seen. But even still, I don't think there should be concern that he'll see that low of a snap share again, especially considering that he earned an 84.0 PFF grade, which was 5th best for the position. That is remarkable for a rookie and very promising for his long-term value in Dynasty. The other young linebacker who I think really improved his stock with an excellent 2024 season was Jack Campbell of the Detroit Lions. Now, it did take an injury to Alex Anzalone for Campbell to kind of finally be unleashed in a weekly full-time role where we didn't have to worry about him getting that inconsistent snap share, which was hindering him up until this point in his young career. But once he got that role, he thrived and he looked like the high draft capital type player that we've been expecting over the last year and a half or so since he was drafted. Now, Campbell was a tackling machine in that LB1 role. He delivered a 95th percentile mark in tackles versus expected, earned a top 12 PFF grade for his position, and was top 20 in both run defense and in coverage. So proving that he can be kind of an all-around great linebacker, both for the NFL and IDP, is definitely important here. And here's the other thing that I found encouraging is that once Anzalone was back in the lineup, which was the lone playoff game that the Lions played this postseason, Campbell still kept his every down role and was arguably the best defensive player in that game for the Lions, behind probably Brian Branch. But also it wasn't like Anzalone was eased back in. And that's why Campbell, playing 100% of the snaps was important, right? Because Anzalone played all but one defensive snap in that game. So we could see that change in defensive philosophy with this Lions linebacker core that allows Campbell to stay an every down player, which is all we can really ask for IDP purposes and as ideal as it gets for dynasty value as well. Okay, my DT1 in Dynasty is up next, Super Bowl champion, and the player that I think has the most long-term potential for the position, already highlighted in his first 2 seasons. It's Jalen Carter of the Philadelphia Eagles, coming out of an impressive year 2 where he once again found himself among the very best pass rushers at the position. Carter finished 96th percentile in expected sacks as a rookie, which was very promising already, but then followed that up, finishing 97th percentile in expected sacks in year 2. Now, he only finished with 4.5 sacks on the year. But again, as we've talked about many times already, actual sacks are not nearly as important of a data point when it comes to projecting forward as our key underlying metrics, specifically expected sacks. And there is no young player who has shown as much promise in that regard as Jalen Carter at just 22 and 23 years old. Like, he's established himself among the top 10 pass rushers at his position. And again, while he hasn't put up crazy sack numbers just yet, if I'm betting on a defensive tackle who can put up double-digit sacks for multiple seasons going forward, Carter is kind of the clear answer for me, given what he's shown so far in his career and knowing that there's some untapped potential there. So wasn't a difficult choice at all for me to have him as DT1. All right, it's only edge defenders and linebackers left now. So we'll start with edge 10 for me. Greg Rousseau of the Buffalo Bills, coming off an excellent breakout season and doing so at just 24 years old in year 4. So he's in an excellent position now to be super productive for years to come. And all those kind of developmental NFL seasons are now behind him, because he wasn't one of those first round picks who hit the ground running, but he's developed into a player worthy of that high draft capital as arguably Buffalo's top defensive lineman, right? So he delivered 8 sacks, so actually came up short of his 94th percentile expected sacks mark, now due for positive regression there as well. And even with just the 8 sacks, he still finished top 10 at his position in IDP, thanks to a very strong tackle rate and high-end playing time. Now, that playing time was a big part of Russo's breakout season, because he started the first couple years of his career in a pretty heavy rotation and then slowly built up his workload, ultimately culminating in a 71% snap share this past season, on top of some career high marks as a pass rusher. I'd expect that to remain consistent at the very least for Greg R, if not improve even in 2025. So I definitely think there's, Greg Rousseau is deserving of finally cracking the top 10 players at his position in these dynasty rankings. Okay, Edge 9 is next, kicking off my top 12 dynasty IDPs. And I went with Alex Highsmith of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Highsmith isn't probably the first name that IDP managers think of when kind of considering top 12 dynasty assets, but I think he should be. Now, he missed some time this season with injury, but that's not a common theme for his career. He's never played fewer than 16 games prior to 2024. And then even hampered by injuries, Highsmith delivered top 10 grades across the board, both overall, run defense, pass rushing grade, and then averaging 74% of defensive snaps. So an ideal workload to pair with that high level of play. And that's been the case for the past few seasons now as well. He was and has been very effective with his opportunities, ranking as edge 7 in points per game and delivering a 90th percentile mark in expected sacks per game, which is one I'd like to point to instead of overall expected sacks when a player misses time, just to highlight where he'd likely finish with a full season under his belt, right? And that's what he was in 2023 as well. He finished 95th percentile in expected sacks. So 27 years old, this is a high-end producer with the underlying metrics to match that should not be overlooked in Dynasty or any format for IDP, because he's a locked-in IDP starter every week as far as I'm concerned, and should be for a few more years. Okay, I've bunched my top 3 linebackers together here inside the top 12. Again, positional value does matter, and the edge position is more valuable, and as far as consistency and long-term viability. That being said, these top 3 linebackers in the dynasty rankings are guys that I think offer at least a couple more years of high-end IDP production, and potentially longer, as they have either the contracts or the talent to stick around in those spots, which is going to be the most important when it comes to dynasty linebacker value. So Zaire Franklin of the Indianapolis Colts signed a 3-year contract extension with the team last offseason, locking him into a starting role for the next few years. And when and what he's been able to do in that role is key, right? Because he has consistently been a top 5 IDP linebacker over the past couple seasons, really giving us no reason not to trust him as a weekly LB1 option as long as he's in the lineup. Now, Lou Anarumo is going to come in and take over as the new defensive coordinator. And while he's typically run more man coverage than Gus Bradley, like it shouldn't affect Franklin's playing time, which is the most important thing. Anarumo's Bengals have been a 2 linebacker system over the past couple years. And who knows, with Jermaine Pratt recently requesting a trade, maybe it'll be Pratt that joins Franklin as the other starter in Indy as we await free agency to see who that might be. But I don't think it affects Zaire Franklin. I think he's locked in as a full-time starter and should continue to be very productive for IDP for a few more years. My LB2 is none other than Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers. I don't know if there's a linebacker in the NFL who is held in higher regard than Warner right now. And considering he's still just 28 years old, both of those things matter a ton as far as long-term viability. Like, not only should he continuously keep getting starting jobs in the NFL as long as he doesn't suffer like a massive drop off in play, but he's proven that he can be LB1 type for IDP as well. He finished as LB9 this past season. He was LB6 in 2023. Now, he hasn't typically been like an overly efficient tackler, but other than this past season, he hasn't really fallen off too far from at least delivering an expected tackle rate either. So keeping in mind, he was also banged up this year with the fractured ankle, I think it was. We talked about the production drop off pre and post injury in season, but even still, he remained out there and continued to produce. So the guy is tough as nails and deserves credit for that. I'd expect a fully healthy Fred Warner to continue producing as expected, with the occasional big plays en route to being a locked in weekly starter for several more seasons. And then lastly, for the linebackers, coming in as LB1 and IDP 9 for these dynasty ranks. Although if your scoring is more tackle heavy and linebackers dominate the leading scorers, then definitely move these guys up. But working off the scoring that we talked about at the top, which provides more balance to the position, then this is about where I would consider the first linebackers. So LB1 is Roquan Smith for me. He's a little bit younger than Warner, which plays a small part in this, but he's also incredibly productive as a tackler, maybe the best in the league over the past few seasons, where he's finished no worse than 97th percentile in tackles versus expected in each of the past 4 seasons, which is just crazy. 99th percentile in tackles versus expected this past year, LB5 in IDP points per game. Didn't grade out amazingly, but again, one of those guys held in high regard in the NFL with first round draft capital to his name. So he's going to continue being utilized as a starter for years to come. All right, it's all edges now, the Elite 8 for my Dynasty rankings, but feel free to sort these guys however you like. But for me, coming in at number 8 is the legendary TJ Watt. And I understand that this is going to be low for some people, especially considering he's coming off yet another Elite IDP season. But there's a few things to keep in mind here. Like, first, he's into his 30s now, making him the oldest player within this top 8. Second, he ranked outside the top 35 players at his position in pressure rate. That is a big drop off in itself. And then he ranked outside the top 75 at his position in win rate, which is concerning, as we may be starting to kind of see those signs of decline. Now, even with that said, there's nothing stopping Watt from playing a ton of snaps, being productive. So as long as he's out there, like, he's a threat to put up edge one numbers. The only thing that keeps him lower here is that there may not be nearly as many of those years left now, basically. All right, another elite IDP asset on an annual basis, Myles Garrett, comes in at number 7, currently of the Cleveland Browns, though who knows how much longer that will be if he does in fact get traded as requested. But either way, no matter where Garrett plays in the next few seasons, it doesn't really matter for his IDP value. The guy is going to produce and dominate at the line of scrimmage, regardless of the situation around him. And odds are that if he does get traded, that he's going to a better situation than the Cleveland Browns. No offense to that organization, but so Garrett, like TJ Watt, is getting older, though he's still a year younger. But at the same time, he's shown no signs of falling off as far as his pass rush metrics. We talked about TJ Watt ranking average to below average in win rate and pressure rate. Well, for Garrett, he ranks second in win rate, second in pressure rate in 2024. And that has essentially been the norm for him as PFF's highest graded edge rusher since 2017, when he was drafted, 95.5 pass rush grade for his career. So essentially, the only other thing holding Garrett back from being higher on this list, aside from getting older, is that he has that lower tackle floor because he's not a high-end tackler. It's just not part of his game. We've seen that almost every year with him, where he's finishing well below his expected tackle totals. Same thing this year. He finished first percentile at negative 15 tackles on the year, below expected. So, the thing is, when you've got a high-end pass rusher like Myles Garrett, and knowing how high the highs can be with him, that's just something we learn to live with and still prosper at the end of the day. All right, coming in at number 6 for me is someone who provides one of the best production floors at the position, Max Crosby, the Iron Man of the edge position. Now, I recognize that he missed games this year, but the Raiders season was in the shitter. And when he's active, he's likely going to be playing every single snap, which is so damn rare for the position. Making it even more rare is that he's capable of those high-end pass rush metrics that lead to better and more consistent sack totals, right? And we've been able to profit off that for the last 3 seasons when we're starting him. Crosby's still just 27 years old, isn't necessarily posting like the league leading pass rush metrics that he delivered back in 2021, but as an IDP, so much of his value comes with that workload, and being just above average with the potential to be elite is going to push him all forms of IDP rankings, really, and still going to keep him up there for me in dynasty rankings as well. Okay, top 5 time now. The newest player to crack this top tier in the dynasty rankings, Jared Verse of the Los Angeles Rams, coming out of a very impressive rookie season where, in my opinion, he's done quite a bit to put himself in this conversation. Even if you think it's overly optimistic after just 1 year, he's absolutely in the conversation. And I'll tell you why. 96th percentile in expected sacks, 97th percentile in tackles versus expected, top 10 PFF grades across the boards as a pass rusher, as a run defender, and overall. He did that as a rookie, which is insane. You pair that with an elite career college profile, like as well, there's so much to like about Verse, and it isn't surprising at all that he hit the ground running in the NFL. So one of the best things about Verse's season as well, which you might not view as a good thing while it was happening, but it is right now, is that he had just 4.5 sacks in the regular season. So not only is he due for positive regression, but he might fly under the radar just enough in drafts this offseason where you can get him at the slightest discount, at least in relation to this ranking. All right, number 4, Will Anderson Jr. of the Houston Texans continued his impressive NFL career just 2 seasons in with 11 sacks. He was edge 18 in IDP points per game and has been looking the part of that first-round pick that he was drafted to be. Still some room for improvement, even to live up to that top 5 potential, in my opinion. And that's kind of what we're banking on here with such a high ranking. Yes, he had 11 sacks, but this is another player with one of those elite college profiles that absolutely should continue to improve and even get better as far as his pass rush metrics go. So 78th percentile in expected sacks is perfectly fine, though probably points to a little bit of potential sack regression next season, even possibly with improved pass rush metrics. So he had a 75.9 pass rush grade that ranked 23rd at the position, but he's also just 23 years old and still hopefully only going to get better, which again is why he's top 5 for me, but still on the outside of that top 3 because he's not quite at the level of those other guys in the top tier for me. Speaking of that top 3, let's get into them now. And number 3 is Nick Bosa of the San Francisco 49ers, who has looked great every single season, consistently among the top 90th percentile in expected sacks. He also owns the best college production profile that I've tracked in my edge model, dating back to 2017, and he has absolutely delivered on that. Former Defensive Player of the Year. He's been an Edge 1 production for IDP. He does it all with elite pass rush metrics to boot. So sure, you can argue that he's older than some others in this range, but he's 27. That's not old. Let's make that clear. Like, he should still be able to perform at a high level for years to come. And that's been indicated in his underlying metrics as well. So like Jared Verse, Nick Bosa also had top 10 grades as a run defender, pass rusher, and overall. Also 87th percentile in tackles versus expected this past season. And he did it in just 14 games. So still edge 3 in points per game, finished as the overall edge 7. The dude is a beast, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. All right, last 2 names remaining here at the top of the dynasty rankings. And number 2 is none other than Micah Parsons. If we're talking elite pass rushers in the league and factoring in his young age as well, just 25 years old, Parsons is absolutely in the conversation with the best. I mentioned Myles Garrett leads all edge defenders in pass rush grades since 2017. But you know who is second on that list, though wasn't drafted until 2021? It's Micah Parsons. Also, consistently among the elite in expected sacks. He was 96th percentile this past year with a top 5 pass rush grade, finished as edge 5 in IDP points per game. He's as good of a bet as there is to be a long-term elite IDP producer. And in the NFL, he's posted double-digit sacks every year that he's been in the league. To pair with those elite marks, that is much easier said than done. And I think we'd be crazy to bet against Parson as an elite dynasty asset for the next few seasons. And then finally, number one for me, after the start to his NFL career that he's had, the start he had to 2024, and even with the injury, I have not wavered in this one the past few months because Aiden Hutchinson is the clear IDP one for me. I have zero concerns about him bouncing back from injury. I mean, the guy was ready to play in the Super Bowl if the Lions made it. So there's no reason to be concerned about him heading into week one and picking up right where he left off. There's a reason that the sports books right now have him already as the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year for 2025. What Hutch did in his 7 games this year had him on pace for a historic season as a pass rusher, posting ridiculous levels of dominance every single week. 95.0 pass rush grade, 94.9 overall grade, 25% win rate, and an insane 38.3%, 25% pressure rate, 38.3% win rate, over 15 percentage points higher than the next closest player, which was Myles Garrett, by the way. All of those numbers were first at the position by a mile. So it absolutely translated to IDP as well. 22.5 points per game was first for his position. I broke down expected sacks into a per game lens as well, as he was 100th percentile there for the year. He was 100th percentile in that mark last year as well, and just overall as well last year. So this isn't a one-year wonder by any means. Just 24 years old, former 2nd overall pick, should have been number 1. Hutch is, to me at least, I understand others may have differentiating opinions, but I'll be honest, I don't think it's close. Hutch is the most valuable IDP in Dynasty, and spoilers for 2025, but I think he'll probably be my IDP 101 for next season redraft as well. So go get you some Hutch if you can, spend up if you have to. We're looking at a special player, and if there's any kind of discount you could get right now coming off injury, I'd be taking advantage of that 100%. Okay, that is a wrap. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to me go over my top 35 Dynasty IDPs for about an hour here. I can't thank you enough for supporting the show. And if you feel up to doing me one more favor and liking and subscribing to the channel, it would mean the world to me. But either way, thank you all. Let's talk about the ranks in the comments if you like. I'm happy to interact with folks as long as you're respectful. And you can check out the full list of my top 250 Dynasty IDPs for free in article form on pff.com. I'll link the description in the episode description. I'll link that in the episode description for easy access. So we'll actually have another IDP episode for you next week with the great Jake Colhagen talking some IDP Dynasty moves that we're trying to make this offseason. So be sure to tune into that. Hopefully I'll see you then. But for now, peace out.